everyone, and welcome to the Sunday Cyber Debate. Today we're going to address vendor management, and we have a guest from Poland, David Bałut. So welcome, David, and let him introduce himself. David, thank you very much for being here.
Sure, it's a pleasure to be here with you, especially that we are both from Poland, so this is exciting. So my career started as a programmer, then I switched to be a sysadmin, and then finally I moved to information security, inspired by Kevin Mitnick's book, The Art of Infiltration. So for a couple of years, last 4 years, I was working for a file sync and share company, which is a cloud provider of file sync and share solutions. And there is a lot of stuff that we need to do as a vendor to provide our customers the quality product. And also we use many vendors in our product to make sure that we provide a high quality product. So this is something, the subject we're going to discuss today is something that I have a lot of interacted with in the past, and I'm interacting with all the time from the both sides. One side is we are a vendor and we also use many vendors in our product. So for the past 4 years, I've been a security engineer, then moved to being a security architect, and now I'm the security principal at Ignite. And I'm responsible for the things we are going to discuss today.
Okay, great. That sounds an amazing experience. So as you know, I've been myself involved in many projects around actually security in general, especially on cloud transformations. And when it comes to cloud transformation, vendors' assessment is very important. So one of the question or aspect that I had from customers very often is, it's fine, it's not my responsibility anymore. The vendor will deal with data privacy and all my security, not even taking into consideration shared responsibility. And the additional other part that is very interesting is that in Singapore, the cybersecurity roadmap or strategy has been very strong. So from other reports, we have Singapore as one of the first countries implementing security controls, but not only in general controls, but really pushing for an ecosystem that is based on maturity around the subject and also understanding from government perspective and also commercial perspective. So how is that related to vendor management? Of course, that means that vendors or other commercial entities need to follow the right controls as well and best security measures. So today, I guess that it will be the same for everyone when deploying and searching for new vendors. And I realized that actually the reality was much more different than the theoretical approach. So,
right.
You probably know that. So, First of all, what I found out is that a lot of vendors do not comply with security, even basic industry practices. From your perspective, is it something that you see often happening?
It does happen very often, and it doesn't matter from which country you are seeking for a solution, whether it's US, whether it's a US startup, if it's a company based in Poland. There are many companies that miss security controls to some extent, some more, some less, but certainly I face the same issue very often, which is hard to analyze in the future because we have so many vendors, there are so many products that we need to analyze from business perspective, and then there comes this security aspect. And I've seen a couple of products that we were almost committed to buy, and then turned out that the latest phase, which was security analysis, turned out to be faulty at all. We couldn't buy the solution because they haven't complied with any standards, even though the product was great.
Yeah, I definitely see what you mean and see your point. What I have seen recently as well is that for many companies in general, the certification that's based on ISO 2013, is actually an assurance for them of their security processes and practices. Of course, I quickly discovered that it's not, and it's only for them a piece of paper, let's say, and let's be controversial. When digging into a little bit more, are the controls really put in place? I discovered that they are not, and we can start from access control to even encryption of data at rest and in transit. So From your experience as well, how do you manage to test the vendors in terms of the technical assurance?
Right, so there is a couple of things we certainly do when we want to exercise the vendor against their security controls. One of the most important things are asking for the certification they may have, like ISO. So it doesn't certify really that this company is 100% secure or we can rely on their product, but it gives you some level of certainty that they have done something in order to secure their organization, or at least show off their security awareness to the whole world by attaining this certification. So this is a good indicator that, okay, this organization is doing something. So those certifications are beneficial, but I wouldn't ever take it for granted as, okay, now they have certification, so we should treat them as safe and safe enough for our environment, because it goes much deeper than the certification can assess.
But we definitely agree that part of the procurement assessment would be based on this kind of certification and practical approach. And this is what we are trying to really change and raise awareness about it, to make sure that whoever is watching this video and our documentary understand that the fact that an organization is providing an ISO certificate does not mean that the right controls in terms of technical security are achieved. I want just to bring on some point that you mentioned. It doesn't show or prove that the company is 100% secure. Of course, we will not be able to prove that for any vendor, no matter what he provides. So the fact that a company works with a multitude of vendors around countries, providing different services and different technologies, they even create a more complex ecosystem. So again, coming back from the fact that you are in Europe, what kind of vendors are you working with? Do you actually have to deal with cross-border differences or cross-border challenges in terms of legislation or data protection as such?
Right. So we have an offices and we serve our product for different countries, like actually around the globe, but mainly we focus in the US, then in Europe, and some countries in Asia. So the compliance part is totally different in various sides of the globe. So for example, when the GDPR came up, there was many companies that we were working with in the past. We've bought the solution and now turned out they're not compliant. So it raised a lot of questions and problems for us, because as we have entities working in Europe, we are obligated to comply with GDPR. And now we had third-party vendors that didn't comply with GDPR, and it raised a lot of problems. Then we had to wait for them to comply. And the business was mess for a couple of months before they were compliant. But certainly the security awareness in terms of privacy laws like GDPR are better in Europe. At least this is my experience. And I'm expecting those companies to have those privacy laws in place sooner than the US-based companies have. And I don't want to name any company, but when I compare oranges to oranges, then certainly European organizations, European security vendors have more awareness about those privacy laws than US-based companies.
So that is definitely an important point to raise, but I would say that from my perspective, I see that the GDPR didn't reach Asia yet. So if I ask you, would you work with a company that is not even aware of the requirement of GDPR and based in Asia? What would be your answer then?
This is a tricky question, because it's hard to tell if they weren't aware about this. Because when you talk to a salesperson from a company, they don't really want to admit that they haven't known about something like GDPR. So they will say like, oh, okay, let me check something. And then after 1 week, they send an email back, yeah, so we've been actually working on this. So it's hard to tell if I've worked with any company that actually haven't knew about the GDPR. But probably yes, that there was a couple of companies. We have some offices in India, and there was a couple of providers that we outsourced some of our staff or engineering resources to India, and they work with a couple of vendors that certainly had no clue about GDPR, based not on their words but their activities. So we just could see that, okay, they're doing things in practical terms, they're doing things that don't comply with GDPR, so there's no way they could be aware about this.
So you mean that if the activities are not related to the GDPR scope, then for you it's fine if the vendor is not compliant?
No, I've meant that some organizations may say they comply with GDPR, or they say that they know about GDPR, but in fact, when I look at their activities, like how do they store the data, how much data do they expose, it turns out that they have no clue what GDPR is all about.
That's an amazing good point, because definitely what I have experienced is that the vendor, because of, let's say, due diligence, they will answer positively to most of the questions because they want to solve. So therefore, they will tell you, yeah, we are compliant with data privacy, we are compliant with GDPR in Europe, we're compliant with HIPAA, etc., etc., etc.
Right.
So it's important to understand as well how to verify that information. So when you said that you actually figured out that they weren't compliant, how did you get to that point?
Usually it was during our penetration tests. So we are doing penetration tests because we do a penetration test against each vendor we collaborate with. If there is a software vendor that doesn't allow us to run our own penetration test, it's a huge red flag for us. Like, if they are certain about their security posture, why wouldn't they allow their prospect to run security tests to make sure that the security is in place and they feel comfortable with the product? So not most. Each time we figure it out during penetration testing, what we found, okay, there is an endpoint that's leaking the data, which is not encrypted, and they are storing the data in their logging system that they weren't supposed to be storing at all, like personal identifiable information. They were not supposed to be storing this. They haven't ever told us that they're going to store this information, but it turned out in their logging system they have plenty of those information which are leaking because of the vulnerability in their system. So this was a huge part. For some organizations which we haven't went with, like we haven't collaborated, we figured out on our questionnaire that we sent to the organizations asking about some of the things they do, like was it the data retentions, what type of data they collect and stuff. So they say they comply, and then when they send back this questionnaire, it turns out that they really don't, because there is a few aspects missing.
Yeah, so in my case, what I have seen is especially about two case scenarios. One was around OWSP practices, and of course that was a development company, and very easy finding, which was related to passwords requirements, and that already showed that definitely the company or the vendor was not following the right best practices. The other example was very, I would say, dangerous, and I was concerned about it because the company was supposed to be PCI compliant, and strangely, they were actually using credit card numbers in clear text storage. So that, of course, it was a red flag and an error to immediately stop working directly on that module, and especially understand why that happens and how it can be mitigated. I think therefore if you have such points that definitely not only raise a red flag for that particular point, but in general as a vendor and their own maturity in terms of cybersecurity, to what extent they take that responsibility as very important. And to what extent it's only on paper for the procurement, and to what extent it's really done and implemented for technical controls. So again, coming back to those different points that you mentioned, David. So if someone comes and tells you, yeah, but I have 100 vendors that I need to manage, I cannot go and ask every vendor, are you really doing that encryption there for my data and storage? What would be your approach?
My approach would be that if you have 100 vendors and you haven't done the vendor risk management in the past, then you already failed at so many things. So if you don't build the security from the ground up, you don't instill security processes while you are building your organization and incorporate staff policies and processes for vendor risk management, then you've done a lot of stuff wrong. And now if it takes to hire 10 security consultants to do the work for you, you should do this, because if you neglected the fact that you should be doing some things, follow some processes, and you haven't, then it's a clear problem. But speaking practically, it doesn't really take that much time to evaluate 100 vendors. it takes one person maybe a week to do all of this, because you can use ready-to-use templates like the open source template from Google or the Vendor Security Alliance, those two organizations that we have written in our article, mentioned in our article, that give you the whole framework, which you just send to your vendor you're collaborating with. They check the bullet points and then send you the responses back, and you can review it, you can load it into this application provided by Google, and you have all the answers clearly explained. So fortunately, we have tools thanks to which you can use it smoothly, you can use it without too much effort. And I would really go with this approach. You can certainly evaluate each vendor. If it's a vendor that you're relying a lot, for example, they're processing your credit card numbers, you are outsourcing password management to them, I would put more due diligence into this, because it's so sensitive data, it's so mission critical, that you should really reevaluate it manually. You should ask more questions, you should meet with those people. But sending those type of questionnaires to them should be good enough for most companies.
So I totally agree with you, and sending questionnaires can be the quick approach. However, in reality, what happens is that when you send, let's say, questions to 100 vendors, they do not answer immediately. They actually take their time. And sometimes, as you mentioned, the salesperson will tell you, oh yeah, don't worry, it's done, I'm sure, but let me check with our technical team. And then you just wait, and 3 weeks after, you still do not have anything properly described. In my case, what I've seen again is vendors sending me the ISO 27000 as a response for actually my due diligence questionnaire. So I guess it's very, again, depending on which kind of criticality is the application that the vendor is dealing with for you as a company, and have a clear understanding of how to verify or have the assurance of all the information that they will provide you. You mentioned solutions. Are you using one in particular, apart the Google one that you mentioned?
Right, so we have our internal questionnaire because we have so complex ecosystem, we have so many applications, we are offering hybrid solution, on-premise and cloud solution, and different customers from different countries have different expectations. So for some vendors that we are certain that we use this vendor for our on-premise solution that is deployed in Asia, for example, we have slightly a bit different set of questions in the questionnaire because our customers expect us to have those answers. So this is certainly one thing, but in general, I tend to use this questionnaire from Google. It's great. In the past, I had my list of questions, the most important questions. Then as we grow bigger and we are scaling up, we have so many solutions. It's not really scalable. It's not practical to manually send those inquiries myself and adjust the questions to each vendor. I use some general template like this one from Google.
So if we come back to our main point in vendor management, our conclusions about that, or main point until now, would be that even if the vendor provides you an ISO certification, that doesn't mean that they have the right technical controls in place. Second point would be around the GDPR or any other data privacy act that needs as well to be clearly, I would say, verified for the vendors that you're working with, and especially if the vendors are in other countries where the same laws or legislations are not enforced. And third point is actually to make sure that you have the right due diligence in place, even if you're dealing with a very important number of vendors. So, said that, what would be the good point for you or takeaway for our, the people who are watching our video today in terms of your experience? Literally, the 3 takeaway apart the points that we have already talked.
Right. So first of all, make sure that you have all vendors covered, because a single vendor that's not doing the right thing is the weakest link in your supply chain. So you must make sure that you've covered all of them. Secondly, make sure that they actually write everything on paper. Don't make yourself involved in endless meetings where they try to convey you that they're good enough, or they try to lowball it, sending you ISO certification and saying everything's good enough because it's not. Even SOC 2 certification, which is level up, where compared to ISO, doesn't certify really that much. It's good to have, but it doesn't say that much how good your security posture is. And lastly, make sure that you incorporate this process from the very beginning for the future vendors, because if you get into this fallacy of thinking that we will figure everything one day, it's not going to happen. If there is more work building upon the past work, it will be very hard to untangle this and make it less complex and figure out a way to manage all of those dependencies on all of those vendors. And especially nowadays, when there is so much new laws and regulations coming in, for example, in Europe, like GDPR, which was a surprise for everyone, it's hard to keep up. So make sure that you have this baseline, and you should be good enough if you just follow the news. So the general advice for organizations would be, make sure you have 100% of vendors covered, don't let them lowball it, and make sure that they answer your questionnaire on paper. Lastly, make sure that you, going further, do this from the very beginning, like from the initial collaboration with vendor. Before you even jump into business analysis, send them a questionnaire. It will save you a lot of time, because I wasted a lot of time for a product that was great, but then it turned out that it's not practical for us to pursue this goal because they don't comply with our security standards. And actually, the fourth point would be, when you're signing a contract, make sure that they are liable. They written it down, they stamped it, that they will be held responsible in case of a data breach, in case they haven't met the expectation you've put on them.
Yeah, thank you, David. Definitely, I agree on your last point especially, which is actually to make sure that in the contracts, it is mentioned that the vendor will be liable, because from the first step, the liability will come down to the customer, and then the customer will find himself very lost with all the legal consequences of that and impact. However, I would add, in terms of liability, not only to make sure that it's in the contract, but also in the master agreement. There are Fortune 500 companies where they had master agreements from 5-7 years ago, and they do not have a review of the contract. So basically, any security liability or any even, I would say, in general liability to data privacy is not included within this contract, and this is just because we are changing. So this is one point that I would definitely like to raise for anyone who's watching us. The second point is, again, coming back to the different legislations or data protection acts. They vary from one country to another. But there is one point that is also very important, is intellectual property of your company. Let's say you are based or headquartered in Singapore, as for myself, and you work with other vendors around countries where actually the intellectual property does not have an important value. What does it mean? It does mean that there are no legal consequences for someone who is stealing your data and intellectual property. What again does it mean? It means that in practical, even if there is a law written about data privacy, or let's say a cybersecurity bill, it's not enforced. So my point here, or my advice would be to make sure that you actually know not only your vendor, but which kind of legislation you're working in and how you can protect yourself if something happens within that country. If the data breach happens in that country and with that vendor, will you be really protected or not? So this, for me, these are the main points in addition to yours, David. Any other things to finish our discussion about vendor management?
I think that the most important part is to be alerted all the time, to not let yourself go with a fancy product, but make sure that you are covered from a security standpoint. I see, especially in Silicon Valley-based startup, that those guys just go for everything that's fancy. They don't really consider the security aspects. If it's looking great, if it's doing the job, if developers like it, they immediately make a purchase. And then it turns out that After a couple of months, this organization, the startup collapsed because they have been breached because the vendor haven't kept their systems secure. So this is crazy important for them to evaluate the products, not because we are telling them, but because there is a practical premise behind this, which is if you don't make sure that your vendors are liable, that your vendors are keeping your product safe, then your organization may go downhill when the breach happens to the vendor. And the very important thing is the cyber insurance thing. Lots of organizations buy cyber insurance thinking that it got them covered against any type of situation, any type of breach. And if you don't have everything settled down with vendor explicitly, saying that this responsibility goes to the vendor, then your cyber insurance company may not pay you for the breach, pay you back, cover your expenses because because you haven't made it explicit enough that the responsibility for this type of data protection is outsourced to the vendor and he takes the responsibility for it. So cyber insurance is a huge field, very often misunderstood and very complex actually. So make sure that if you have cyber insurance, and you should have, I believe everyone should have cyber insurance because it's a great thing. You should make sure that you comply with the regulations from the cyber insurance company.
That's an interesting point as well. However, I would like to add that cyber insurance are not yet mature everywhere in the same aspect like cybersecurity in general, depending on where you are. So what happens is that the policies are not well explained and they are not covering all the aspects of cybersecurity as such. And that is why, and the reasons why we had several low even court cases where just a vendor or a customer was actually, chasing the cyber insurance due to the fact that the policy said, okay, we're going to reimburse you all the business disruption loss. And then it ended up that it was $7 million and it was disapproved or not agreed by the cyber insurance. So yeah, there is two factors. First, to make sure that you have the right due diligence proof. It's not only about the willingness to do that, but it's written, it's documented clearly, and it's safe and backed up. But also on the other side, making sure that whenever you buy the cyber insurance, that you understand that it's just the residual risk that will be transferred to the insurance. They will not take into consideration whatever happens to you, just pay money for it. So
100%, yep.
David, thank you very much. It was great discussing with you this topic. I think we might have more questions, and I just would like to finish that this happened and this discussion happened thanks to Peerlyst. And if people out there do not know Peerlyst, Peerlyst is an amazing community of InfoSec professionals sharing about different subjects, from penetration testing to risk management, to different questions related to certifications. So peerlyst.com, we're going to share the link as well. Join us if you are not yet there. And thank you very much for watching this video. Thank you again, David, and talk to you very soon.
Thank you, Maida.
Cheers.